You know, as teens, we all have questions about faith and religion, but we've all been too scared to ask. Well, here at 1315, we strive to answer those questions so that you can boldly stand up for your faith in everyday scenarios, like over a cup of coffee. So, grab your coffee mugs and let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back for another episode of 1315. I'm Caleb Eckerd, and I'm joined with Allen Crostic for what is really episode 2, but should be considered episode 3, thanks to good old reliable technology. So thank you, Allen, for taking some time out of your evening to come and record with me again.
No problem. Happy to be here.
So what we were going to address last time was we were going to talk about the argument of, well, don't all religions just lead back to God? You know, it doesn't really matter who I follow or what I follow, because can't that get me there some way, shape, or form or another? So that was a awesome conversation, and none of y'all were here to hear it, but it went well. So there's that. So we're gonna go and we're gonna try and talk about it a little bit more. So kind of like last time. We did a little bit of a role play. Yeah. Again,
do you want to do that again?
Yeah, or? we can role play it for you.
Sure.
So stepping into character now, I guess we'll do starting now. Then. So, Allen, you know, I kind of hear you're about this Jesus-y stuff, right? You go to church on Sundays, and you know you have your little meetings with the people downtown and whatever and whatnot. But like, I mean, it seems like you're just a good person, and I mean, I like that. I respect that. I like to consider myself a good person as well.
Okay.
So you know, like, what can't that could be enough for me, right? I mean, there are good people in all religions. I mean, Muhammad was a good guy. You know, Gandhi was a great guy. All those people are great people. So I don't understand. You know, okay. How can God say no to a good person?
Well, let me ask you this: how much have you studied the other religions to really contrast and compare, to see what the similarities and differences are?
I could say I've dabbled, you know, a little studying world history throughout schooling and whatnot, and then a little independent study on my own on the side here and there.
Okay. Well, let's just take one example. You mentioned Islam, I believe.
Yes.
Right? How familiar are you with Islam?
So. Not so.
So? Okay. Well, see, the fact of the matter is that people have this idea that religions are similar in a lot of ways, but they actually vary wildly in their fundamental beliefs. Take, for example, what the fundamental beliefs of Christianity. Let's look at Romans 10:9. We're told in that passage that if we confess with our mouths that Jesus is Lord and believe in our hearts that God raised him from the dead, we will be saved. So essentially what you have is death, deity, resurrection. Those are the things that one must believe to be saved. Do you happen to know what the Quran says about that?
About Jesus specifically?
Yeah.
Well, in the Quran it says that he wasn't God.
He wasn't God.
And he was just a good prophet, and he was crucified, but he didn't raise from the dead.
Well, actually, no, they don't even believe he was crucified. So according to Surah 157, it basically says that it just looked like he was crucified, but he wasn't really. And Muslims have different ways to explain that. The most popular way, most traditional way, is a substitution theory. That at one point in time, God just made someone else look like Jesus and put them on the cross. Some say it was Judas Iscariot as a form of cosmic justice. Some say when Simon of Cyrene was helping him, would carry his cross, that they got confused. Never mind the bloody mess that Jesus was. And then there's the theistic swoon theory. But regardless, the idea is if he wasn't crucified, he wasn't resurrected. And then you have Surah 572, which doesn't merely say you shouldn't believe in Jesus, but if you do, your abode will be the fire of hell. All right. So the three things you have to believe to be saved in Christianity are the three things you must not believe to be saved in Islam. If you believe Jesus is God, you've committed the sin of shirk. Basically identifying God with something or someone else. But here's the other question. Let's say that other religions did have similarities. Why do you think the similarities are more important than the differences?
It's a good point. They should be theoretically of equal value, split 50-50.
Maybe, but you can put it this way. This is one of the examples that Greg Kokel uses. Are aspirin and arsenic the same thing because they both come in tablet form?
They're most certainly not.
No. So sometimes differences are crucial, and religions are one of those things. See, a lot of times people will say, well, who are we to say that Christianity is better than any other religion? And kind of like you were saying, the main thing that is important is love. Maybe all religions are valid paths to God, right? There isn't just one way. And I like to ask, what do you think Jesus' opinion on that was?
Well, I think that he would, let's say that anybody that would be willing to sacrifice themselves for the poor, sacrifice any of their belongings, or give to the common good would be worthy of, would be worthy of him. That's what.
Okay, so if I understand what you're saying, like anybody who's willing to put others before themselves.
Yeah, to be selfless, to live out humility.
Okay, so that's what you think Jesus' own opinion would be, right?
Well,
we're still role playing here, of course.
Yes, absolutely. Right. We're still role playing.
All right, so
always like to throw that clarification in here.
So here's another question, though. With respect to Jesus' humanity, what was he? With respect to his ethnicity, what was he?
He was Jewish.
He was Jewish, and his religious views were Jewish. He was an observant Jew. He was a rabbi, which means that he affirmed the teaching of the Old Testament. He affirmed the Torah, right? He affirmed the Ten Commandments. What is the first one of the Ten Commandments?
You shall have no other gods before me.
Right. We owe fidelity to the Lord God alone, and all other religions or gods are distortions or deceptions, right? And not only that, but Christians didn't initially call themselves Christians. That was a pejorative term that they were called by others, first started in Antioch. I think it's in Acts 11. But they had a special name for themselves. What did they call themselves?
I believe they called themselves the Way.
Right, the Way, not a way, the Way, right? And not only that, but out of Jesus' own mouth, he basically says, no one can come to the Father but through me. So it's pretty plain that Christianity teaches that it's through Jesus alone. That's not my claim. That's not your claim. That's his claim. And if he really did rise from the dead, then we should take that claim seriously. Does that answer your question?
I believe it does. So I think this, and we're done role playing, obviously, because this is one of the glories of podcasting, is that it's hard to tell this sometimes. But that was a lesson we learned from last time.
Yeah.
We're like, oh, wait a second, we need to let them know.
Which it's really a shame. I felt so much more awake last time.
I know. Yeah.
We're both kind of. It's been a long day. It's later in the evening.
Yeah, this is a little bit later.
What can you do?
But it's not raining like it was last time. So there's that. But yeah, I think kind of role playing in that sense helps everybody kind of understand that while people like to make things seem like they're very similar, that religions vary widely.
Right.
And that it's not any which way you can figure out to get there. That it is in fact the one way. And I think the big deception that people want to, impose is that it's not is that Christianity is just the same as all of them.
Right.
I feel like that's one of the biggest things, is that people are like, that's fine for you.
Sure.
But, like whatever works for you is what works for you.
They treat the gospel more like a cookie than a cure. Right?
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to go out of my way to tell everybody that chocolate chip cookies are the best cookies out there.
Right.
Right? But if I thought I had a cure for cancer, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
Because I'm not just giving you my preference. I'm giving you something that is an objective reality for all people at all time. But the main thing to notice, though, in that conversation, I'm asking you to answer the questions for me. Mm-hmm. I'm posing the questions to you.
Yep.
What, like, for instance, what do you think Jesus thought about himself? What do you think Jesus' opinion was? What did the first Christians call themselves? What was the first commandment? As somebody who affirmed the 10 Commandments, what was the first one? So I'm getting you to tell me. And see, when you get other people to tell you, one thing it's going to hit them harder because they hear the answer coming out of their own mouth. And there's going to be a little bit more buy-in.
Yep.
Versus kind of coming across to somebody like you're trying to lecture them.
Yeah, and it's hard to turn off the switch to your ears when it is coming from your own mouth rather than having someone sit there and just talk it out to you.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think that also kind of comes like the cookie versus the cure is that there's a big difference between a cookie and a cure. And I think you also, not just with other religions, but also with kind of like the atheism philosophy is a lot of people are like, I don't know why you're talking to me. Like, I don't know why you have the atheist will kind of say, well, I don't know why you have such a big burden on yourself to prove me wrong. Mm-hmm. Like, this is just what I believe and what I see, so I don't see why you have to impose that upon me. It's kind of the response that I see generally as I kind of view the world.
Right. So you shouldn't impose your opinions on others, right?
Right.
And I'm going to ask, is that your opinion?
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and you'll find the best way to have these conversations is really, I got to be honest, 9 times out of 10, I don't even initiate them. Mm-hmm. They do. They don't realize they're initiating them, but I notice the ways in which I can respond, and I can ask follow-up questions that will lead the conversation in the direction that I want it to go. And we even find that through Scripture. When they were trying to trick Jesus, like when the Pharisees and Sadducees were trying to trick him, they would say, "Tell us, is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" And Jesus says, "Give me a coin." He says, whose image and whose inscription is on this coin? Caesar's. He says, well, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. So they were trying to trap him, but he kind of did a boomerang on them. And I mean, we find, every time Jesus asked a question, it was for a purpose. And that's the way that we should be too. And we're using the Columbo tactic that we talked about last time. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I think that is one of the cool things is that, I love in how throughout all the Gospels, when Jesus is talking to someone, he tailors what he's saying to that specific audience. It's not just one size fits all. And I think that's an important thing to know when you're talking to anyone, really, is to remember who you're talking to. But is that he really does. He does not. I think that this is also from Kokel, but the Lord did it way before Kokel wrote it down. But he doesn't use a statement if he can answer it with a question first.
Yes.
And so it's really
with the woman at the well and
all the people that had the biggest not grudge, but they had Jesus beef, so to say. They were out for him. He always answered them with a question, which I think is cool, and you see the thoughtfulness in the Scripture. So that's like a total side note, but just something to kind of to sit back and marvel at, really.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. I think this is I think people who listen to this are going to be a little surprised that it's not such a long, drawn out episode. I think they're going to be a little surprised because
it was a lot longer last time we did it, wasn't it? The one that we lost, but
yeah, the one that we lost. I don't know why that one was so long.
Yeah, we talked about a lot of other stuff in that one.
We did. I feel like there were a lot of sidebars.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, it's and I think that's the big thing with a lot of these topics. Now there are those topics that they're deep. They go forever. Mm. But some of the most asked questions are quick and they're very short. You just have to truly think about them. I mean, like, set aside that time where you sit and you think about it and you
sure.
process
it. Do you have any other questions that you think that people might ask on a day-to-day basis?
I think the biggest one that kind of goes in hand with this is how can you say that there's a good and loving God out there when evil exists? And I feel like I don't foresee any way that you can have the first conversation without this one coming in as well.
Okay.
So I feel like this would be a good one to answer to go along with as well.
And what do you mean by evil?
Well, like wrong, or quote unquote, I'm using my air quotes. I wish the people at home could see this, but quote unquote, like bad things like war and disease and poor people.
Now, do you think those things are objectively bad, or you just don't like them? And do you know what I mean by objective?
Objective, like there's a standard of it, like it shouldn't be this way.
Well, like valid and binding independently of what anyone thinks. I like how Craig puts it. He says, for instance, like take for example the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. To say that the Holocaust is objectively evil means that it would still have been evil even if the Nazis won World War II and either exterminated or brainwashed everyone that was left so that everyone thought the Holocaust was good. Mm-hmm. In other words, it is evil independently of what anybody might think about it. That's what we mean by objective.
Wow, so I guess
So it's mind independent is objective. Subjective we might call mind dependent.
Yeah.
Like vanilla ice cream is the best ice cream in the world. Well, that's a subjective thing. Or the moon is ugly. That's a subjective statement.
Right.
The moon is round. Well, that's an objective truth.
Right.
So what's interesting is you're saying, why is there evil? Now, I sincerely believe that if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties don't exist. What gives them their objectivity?
An objective rule giver, a rule setter, or a standard setting thing.
Yeah. Because otherwise you're ultimately left with personal preference.
Yeah.
I just don't like this, right? And I remember C.S. Lewis once said that. He says, my biggest beef with Christianity when I was younger was that I looked at the world and said, it's so unjust. Mm-hmm. There can't be a God. He said, but then I thought, where am I getting this idea of just and unjust?
Yeah. If
I say it's just my own opinion, or whether it's just my own subjective preference, or whether it's something that society came up with, or whether it's just something that that we were just fashioned to believe through sociobiological evolution. If I believe these things, if that's where I say where it's coming from, my argument against God collapses. Because my argument depends on the fact that things really are unjust. But without a transcendent anchor point like God to ground objective moral values and duties, what basis do I have to make that judgment?
You just don't like it.
I just don't like it.
Because, when you think about it, even within our own time here, the Nazi leaders thought what they were doing was
good,
perfectly fine. They were like, we're fixing this puppy right up. This is going to be, world's going to look great. It's going to be perfect now. They thought they were, they thought they were purging it of the evil. They thought they were doing what was good, but yet somehow we the majority of everybody knows that what was taking place was evil.
Yeah.
What we would classify as evil.
And these days, everyone, surprisingly, among philosophers, the majority of philosophers are moral realists. That means they really do believe in objective moral values and duties. Mm-hmm. There are more moral realists than there are moral relativists, who say, that's true for you, but not for me in terms of moral judgments.
How do you know that statement's true?
Yeah, but no one can consistently live that way.
Exactly. Yeah.
The moment you open your mouth, and actually going back to Kokel, he calls this the myth of moral neutrality. It's the idea that you think when it comes to the moral questions, there's neutral ground that you can stand on. And everyone has their own island of morality in their own little sphere. And if you presume to judge somebody with what they're doing in their own little sphere, you are intolerant, right? So the thing is, in the face of anything you find morally objectionable, the moment that you open your mouth and make a moral recommendation, you have affirmed at that moment that you believe that morality is objective, in a sense, and not subjective. Mm-hmm. Unless someone's really quick to say, well, that's just my own personal opinion. But then the question can be raised, why are you talking at all? I mean, why do I care whether you like broccoli or Brussels sprouts? It's irrelevant. Right. But see, hidden in the back there, that is the presumption that other people have an obligation to care about what you care about.
Exactly, yeah.
So the morality gets smuggled in the back door. So I don't even know if the question is a coherent one without God as your anchor point for objective moral values and duties. And not only that, from another standpoint, I would say, this world, why are we here? Many people assume that we're here to be happy. God wants us happy. But God wants more than that. Mm-hmm. The ultimate objective to this life is to know God personally. And if that's the case, God might allow and put up with certain evils in this world. And he might allow that too, knowing what the ripple effect is going to be.
Yep.
God's justifying reasons for allowing something. It might not even show up till 100 years from now in another country. So
I think that kind of goes to the analogy that John Piper uses is that, in a mosaic, there's a ton of little, and a ton, that's a specific word, but there's a ton of light tiles, dark tiles, shades of gray tiles and whatnot.
Yeah.
And they all, the light ones being good stuff that happens, dark ones being bad things that happen, and they are like what we would classify as evil. Mm-hmm. And kind of on the mosaic that is eternity, right? They all come together to make a picture. And this picture ultimately points back to the glory of God and the fact that those dark tiles prove that there are lighter tiles, and that we have the opportunity to see that, and then it just...
I like that. That's really good. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
So for those who are more visual, but yeah, I think that is like, throughout my, I'm a senior in high school this year, so like I get the chance for like, oh my goodness, it's like 180 days out of my whole year to spend time with people for 7 hours a day, 5 days a week. And, these kinds of conversations always come up, but that is one point that consistently comes up. And it's like it's like the classic, I would mark it as a classic question.
Yeah.
And, like I said, there's so many of these quote unquote classic questions that seems so hard when we sit back and we're like, oh my goodness, I don't know how to answer this. This is going to be, what am I going to do? But the answers are they're not that hard.
No.
And
really, at the end of the day, I mean, as far for the Christian, it's part and parcel of Christian theology to believe that this is a fallen world and it has gone wrong.
Yeah.
We should expect evil.
Exactly.
For that reason. I mean, that's from the very beginning. God said, if you disobey me, if you eat of the tree, you will die. Not you will die of a ripe old age in your sleep. and we've been attending funerals ever since.
Yep.
So much so, the only thing that's going to keep you from seeing everyone you know and love die from murder, accident, or disease will be your own death from murder, accident, or disease.
Yep.
So that's part of Christian belief. Far from it being a defeater of it.
Yeah. I do think it is funny because when people say, well, why is there, they kind of bring this up and you're like, you're telling me something that I already know. Being a Christian doesn't mean that you deny that there's evil in the world. You're like, no, we don't see that. You're like, exactly. It's right there. Yeah. That's the point.
and I think too, it depends on what type of lens you're looking at this world through. Mm-hmm. Many people, you hear these life metaphors. Some people see all of life as a merry-go-round, as a carousel. Uh-huh. Some as a theme park. All of life as a stage. But if you see life as something a lot more stern than that, like a training ground, your perspective is going to be very different. And I think in the perspective of eternity will dwarf the suffering of this life to insignificance. To where the most torturous and awful life that's conceivable in the perspective of eternity will seem like nothing more than a bad night in an inconvenient hotel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think about that kind of brings up the, kind of the argument of, well, if God didn't create evil, then, some people are like, well, God created evil because, they talk about the pre-fall, God made Satan. So, God created evil. And I think about, the subject of, well, how does, if it went bad one time, how is that not to say that it won't go bad a second time once we all get back into heaven? And I think the thing is that I don't believe that, Lucifer ever experienced the life that we live. And so all he knew was the splendor and the glory of God. And he's like, I think I can make this better.
Yeah.
Until, we kind of show up and we realize, oh my goodness, it literally does not get better than this.
Yeah. So there's a couple things there when people say, why did God create evil? Is evil something that has any positive existence to it? No. I like to put it this way, just like dark is the absence of light, mm-hmm. or cold is the absence of heat. It doesn't mean that cold or dark are not real things, but they're what you call privations. They're the absence mm-hmm. of those things. And in the same way, that's what evil is. That goes all the way back to St. Augustine, that evil is a privation of good.
Yep.
And when it really comes down to it, evil comes from a disordered will within the person. Now, why did Satan rebel is the question. Why does anyone rebel? Anybody rebels because they feel like they deserve better and they're not getting it, mm-hmm. right? And if you think about it, that's what got Satan, and that was Satan's trick with Adam and Eve. Mm-hmm. God doesn't have your best interests in mind. He just doesn't want you to know.
Yeah.
So but how do we know that we'll never experience another fall? Well, there's several things to consider. One, like you were saying, before Satan fell, one didn't know the consequences of what would happen.
Yeah.
We now know what it looks like to have a rebellion. Mm-hmm. Two, part of living in this world and experiencing the suffering we're learning that sin is really stupid.
Yes, there's oh golly, there's a is it a book? Maybe I think it's an article that I wrote. It's called The Stupidity of Sin.
Oh yeah,
and it just talks about how sin is stupid.
It really is, and I remember my professor saying this. He says put it this way. He says, see this pen? He goes, you know why I'm not going to jab this pen into my eye? Because that would be a really dumb thing to do. And even if I lived to be over 1 billion years old, I would never do that. And see, on the other end, in eternity, we'll look back at this life and we're like, that was just really stupid. And the other thing is, right now we walk by faith. In eternity, we will walk by sight. Mm-hmm. And also, and this is the bad thing, when we think of hell as eternal torment, that means there will be an eternal reminder of the consequences of rebelling against God. Mm-hmm. Because the damned will continue to freely sin against God and consequently experience more hell, on and on and on.
Yep.
So for all of those reasons, I think we can be pretty confident there will not be another falling away, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I think we're almost over time.
All right. Well, wow, we thought we were going to be short, and I just kept running my mouth. Sorry about that.
No, you're good. No, we covered I think one specifically, two specifically, and then we got one loosely in there at the end, and that's good because I think that's the way that conversations progress, and that's the way they go. Sure. And it would be foolish for us to do anything, apart from that, because this is kind of what I want people to see, is that it, it's nice and ordinary. It's not, you and I are simply having a conversation. It's not like we have although we do have a whiteboard in this room, we're not currently sketching on it, making a game plan, drawing X's and O's and lines, and, using our laser pointer and clicking with our buttons on the next slide to our presentation. It's just a conversation.
Sure.
So that's good. Well, again, I thank you for your time greatly, because...
thanks for having me.
Again, so glad that you came back. Glad to have you back. And hopefully, fingers crossed, this won't... this one will stay in the computer and behave itself. So
sounds good.
All right.
Thanks, man.
Absolutely. If you haven't gone ahead and take some time to subscribe to the podcast, also subscribe to the blog on groundsforfaith.com, as well as check out the new apparel that was released. You've got, by the time this episode airs, you'll have a little bit more than a week to purchase your, you'll have like 8 days to purchase your stuff before the store closes. So make sure that you go do that, and take care and have a blessed one.